Thank you. Let's give Rick and Katie a huge round of applause for hosting us. Oh, so gorgeous. I'm sort of glad my wife's not here to see this. How do we live in New York again? She actually does get like that. She's very, very envious of the Southern California lifestyle in particular. It's great to be here, and I'd love to make this sort of an intimate event and take some questions and try and help move your understanding of the campaign forward, because I have a feeling that most of you have seen me speak on the TV or the video, and so I can get all that stuff out of the way. So is that right? Raise your hand if you've actually seen me speak enough where you're like, okay, I get like the general. If you're not at that, don't worry, I'll do like a whole one-on-one, like 20-minute individually. Yeah. But I'm not someone who ever thought he'd run for president. And in this crew, I can make the joke. It's like, I'm Asian. It's not like your parents are like, you're gonna be president someday. It's not really on the list. I grew up like many of you. My parents met at UC Berkeley as graduate students. Anyone here? Go Bears! Go Bears! So they met at Berkeley. My brother's actually named after the Lawrence Observatory. So we used to joke that my parents got busy there, but I'm sure they didn't. They were very well-behaved Taiwanese graduate students. And my father intended to try and stay. They loved California, because what's not to love? Imagine immigrating to Berkeley from Taiwan. They were like, let's stay here. And then my dad tried to get jobs on the West Coast and then wound up finding a job on the East Coast at GE in Schenectady, New York. So they reluctantly moved to upstate New York, and that's where I was born. So I was born in Schenectady, then my dad moved from GE to IBM. My dad's a physicist. He generated 69 US patents for GE and IBM over his career. And I remember when I was a teenager and old enough, well, first, I thought everyone's dad had a PhD when I was a kid, so I was like, oh, what's your dad's PhD? And the kid's like, taught me the hard way. I was like, wrong. I was like, oh, what'd I do wrong? And then I got a little bit older, and then I realized that my dad had these patents. I was like, hey, Dad, how much do you get paid when you make a patent? And then he said, oh, I get paid like $200, $250. I was like, that doesn't seem like a lot. It's not a very good deal. Yeah. And then he said, well, I also get paid a salary to house and feed and clothe you and your brother. And I was like, oh, I get it. I get how your job works. So he generated a number of patents over his career. My mom worked at a local university and then became a pastel artist. And my parents told me what I think many of you might have heard, which is to just do well in school. And so I was pretty good at school. I went to Exeter and then Brown and then Columbia for law school. And I know Dave from our law school days. Where's Dave Min? Let's give Dave Min a round of applause, because he's an incredible champion for the community in the months and years to come. So I was in law school. I was an unhappy corporate attorney for 5 whole months. Thought the job was pretty terrible. No offense to the lawyers here, because I know there are some of you. I think my joke at the time was that my law firm was like a temple to the squandering of human potential. Because I was like, wow, we have a lot of really smart people here doing this very, very essentially like brainless menial work for the most part. And so I heard like laughing. It's like hitting close to hope. I'm gonna tell you guys a follow-up story from like years later. A major law firm brought me in during like the depths of the recession and the financial crash to try and like encourage attrition. They were like trying to get their associates to leave, so they brought me in to be like, it's better out there. Anyway, so I left the law firm after 5 months to start a business, and I know there's a very entrepreneurial crowd. Katie and I bonded in part because she's such an incredible entrepreneur, and I know many of you have done something similar. How many of you have started a business or an organization or a club or an effort of some kind? Yeah, look at that. Look at that. Hands. I love it. I knew it. So I ventured out to try and start a business in my mid-20s. I left the firm after 5 months. If you have your hand up, you know a couple of things. Number one, you know that starting a business is much, much harder than anyone indicated before you started your first business. Number two, you know that when someone asks you how it's going, what do you say?
Great.
It's going great. It's only one answer to that question. If you talk about the problems, people are like, I'm not going to buy your stuff. Always like, it's going great. So my business went great until it failed. My parents told their friends I was still a lawyer, because they're like, oh, Andy's doing all right. In reality, I'd lost investors hundreds of thousands of dollars. I owed $100K in law school debt. I used to call my school loans my mistress, because I was like writing a check to a phantom family in another town. It's like, hope they're having a good time. So this is just letting you know that like none of this was like, oh, this guy's presidential material. In my 20s, I was just learning the hard way, starting this business. But I've been bitten by the bug, and like many of you who've done it, I know if you raise your hand and you start a business, you've probably done more than one thing. It's probably unlikely that you started a business 25 years ago and you've been doing the same thing. So I worked at a series of startups, became the CEO of an education company that grew to become #1 in the US and was then bought by a public company in 2009. So this, to me, was where like my path turned towards me running for president. Because up to this point, fairly normal stuff, startup, entrepreneur. And my business acquired, and 2009 was a very, very rough time in a lot of the country. It's like the financial crisis in full bloom. And I thought that I had some insight as to why the financial crisis had happened. It's because so many of my classmates from Exeter and Brown and Columbia had gone to Wall Street to create these exotic financial instruments that had contributed to the financial crisis. So I thought, well, that's a disaster, and I'd had my career shaped so profoundly by entrepreneurship that I said, well, I'd love to have more young people follow that path, like the path that many of you followed. And I think there's a Venture for America fellow here, is that right? Did someone get, yes. She's 2020, so she's gonna show up in Detroit next summer for training camp, make a bunch of incredible new friends. So I spent 7 years running this organization, Venture for America, to help cultivate entrepreneurship in Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, New Orleans. And at this juncture, I thought, well, a lot of you are doing very positive things. I know Katie is doing very positive things. And most of us wait to do that at some point in our career when we're frankly doing pretty well. And it's like, all right, I'm doing all right, it's time to give back. So I thought I would do this in the middle of my career instead of at the end. I thought, like, well, this will be a way I can just do more good faster. And so Venture for America was this incredible education for me. How many of you grew up here in California? Sense that most of you. Look at that. I thought so. Yeah, it's very nice here. Like, why would I leave? Anyone here grow up in the Midwest? The South? So if you grew up in the Midwest or the South, you saw a lot of what I saw over the last 7 years, which was totally new to me, because I grew up in the Northeast, so I had never been to Birmingham or St. Louis or even Detroit or Cleveland. And I saw the gulf between different parts of the country was so much bigger than anything I'd imagined. Where if you fly between a place like this, frankly, and Michigan or Ohio, you feel like you're traversing not just a few time zones, you feel like you're crossing dimensions or decades or ways of life. And so I was staggered when I went out there to the country and spent 7 years learning all this. And then Donald Trump became our president in 2016. Now, many of you are here today because you are not excited about Donald Trump becoming president in 2016. Though I'd imagine some of you probably were excited that he won. And all of us have family members and friends and neighbors that supported Donald Trump. To me, his election was a clear red flag that things had gone fundamentally wrong for many, many Americans. And again, I thought I had some insight why, which is that like I'd spent 7 years in the Midwest and the South, and I saw that the economy had evolved in ways that had left many, many people behind. So this is all a very elaborate way of saying, like, I never intended to run for president, but if you've been through what I've been through the last now 8, 9 years, you feel like you had some understanding that the rest of the country did not. Where I feel like our economy is like an elephant. You guys all know the parable of the elephant, where it's like the blind man and the elephant, where it's like, you ask the blind man what the elephant looks like, and he says it's a tree trunk. And another person says it's a snake. Another person says it's a rope. And I feel like that's the U.S. economy for most Americans, where there's touching a piece of it. And I felt like because I'd spent the last 7 years traveling the Midwest and the South, and living and working in New York and San Francisco and D.C., that I felt like I understood what the elephant looked like in a way that most Americans did not. And I had a personal stake in it because I felt like immigrants were being scapegoated for issues that immigrants had nothing to do with. And that my country did not understand that we're going through this fundamental economic transformation this fourth industrial revolution that now is accelerating. It's going to leave many more Americans behind. So this is a long-winded way of saying that this is what got me to run for president. It was like, okay, I get it. I believe I have something to contribute that's different than anyone else in the field, and that I can make this case to the American people that we have these fundamental problems to solve, and it's not these cultural symptoms or emblems, that these food fights of the political world that we should be focused on. We should be focused on this fundamental economic transformation. And I will say to you all that one of the things that got me to run for president was thinking, you know what, I bet I can make the debate stage. And I think that having an Asian American on the debate stage would be very, very good for the Asian American community. That was self-conscious. I was like, I bet I can do that. I did that. But now I stand before you today, either 4th, 5th, or 6th in national polls.
Yeah!
There's one poll that came out that said I'm polling higher than Kamala Harris here in California. So just like you, I'm like an immigrant or a child of immigrants, which you know what happens? The better I do, the greedier I get. So now I'm not content just to make the debate stage. We can win this whole thing.
Yes.
We genuinely can. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through some of the inside baseball because you all think the same way I do, I believe. Our path to victory is very real. I looked at the numbers, I looked at the math. The math, yeah. So we're consistently rising in the polls. How many of you have participated in a political poll? Raise your hand. So it's a relatively low proportion of you, which makes sense, because most of the people that get polled get called on landlines. They're laughing, I know. Some teenager here is like, landline? So there are a few things that happen in terms of your participating in a political poll. Number one, you generally have to have a landline. Number two, you generally have to be a registered Democrat. Number three, you actually have to pick up the phone and talk to the pollster involved. So these are not things that overlap that heavily with my support base, frankly, because our support base tends to skew a bit younger, a bit more tech savvy, and we're drawing higher proportions of independents and libertarians and even Republicans than other Democratic candidates. So even though our poll numbers are rising, our internal numbers show that our real support's actually a whole level higher than what the polls are showing. This is going to be particularly fruitful in a place like New Hampshire that's an open primary. You can actually show up day of in New Hampshire and just be like, hey, I'm gonna, you can just like participate in the Democratic primary essentially. And the third party in New Hampshire is libertarians. And libertarians really seem to like me a lot. Maybe it's because the freedom dividend is sort of named after them. And I seem like I have something of a libertarian streak, which I'll confess I sort of do. Because I really dislike laws that either don't make sense or cannot be enforced or just like are sort of there on the books, but then people are just like finding their way around them. I think those sorts of laws are deeply unproductive. So in New Hampshire, our numbers show that even though our polls are going up and up, or we've been polling at like 5, 6, 7% in some polls, our real support is higher than that.
Yes.
And the press is going to come in, and if we can shock the world in one of the early states, how many of you are really into politics? Raise your hand on that.
Now I am.
All right. Thanks for that, Henry. You know what, I do get that a lot too, because we're activating a lot of people that have not been traditionally into politics that much, which also happens to overlap with Asian Americans. No, it's true. So it's another reason why I decided to run is I thought I could help activate the Asian American community politically. So as I get on the debate stage, activate our community, because I fundamentally do believe that we have to contribute much more to the political conversation in this country. We have a lot to offer. And I say, it's like, look, my parents came here for a better life for me and my brother, and it worked. And now we have to give back because this country needs us. So the support we're going to get in some of the early states is going to surprise the press a lot. The $10 million we raised in the last quarter surprised the press a lot. And thank you for everyone who contributed to that, which I suspect is most of you. Now, despite this incredible backdrop, something like 90% plus of those donations were small dollar donations. The increments were only $30 each. So I joke that my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. This is very much a grassroots campaign. Yang Gang is generally a very cheap gang to join. But our internal numbers are also showing growth. I mean, we're growing from Q3. So we raised 2.8 million in Q2, and people are like, oh, that's interesting. Raised 10 million in Q3, and then people are like, whoa, like that's like 50% more than Booker and 100% more than Klobuchar, and like so, like that number is significant. And we're one of only 6 candidates in the field that now has 7-digit buying power for ads and the like. And so that's what we're doing. You're going to see Andrew Yang TV ads coming up. Probably not where you live, because we're not going to blow it on Southern California.
Yeah.
But if you move to Iowa. So the game plan is for us to invest the resources. We're growing. We're raising more money. We're on pace to raise more money in Q4 than Q3 too. So the press will be like, oh, this growth. We're one of only 2 campaigns in the field that's grown every period. So we're going to grow and grow and grow. And then the first state to vote is Iowa, where I'm heading. Oh my God, I'm going there November 1st, which I think is this Friday. My wife's coming with me, so that's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Yangapalooza. So Rivers Cuomo of Weezer is coming in to do like a Weezer concert in Iowa for the campaign.
Is Zoo coming?
I don't know if Zoo's not coming. Just too bad. I was just in a dance music video. For this guy.
Came for the low!
Yeah, I came for the low. I have to wait till the end of the video for my cameo. I'm gonna tell you guys a story that some of you will appreciate. So I guested at this Rich Brian concert in New York. You guys see that?
Yeah.
So Rich Brian's this Asian rapper. So if you're my age, if you don't know about him, don't worry about it. So I was like, so I'm like Twitter friends with him. So I was like, yeah, you're playing in New York. Can I come show up to your concert? And he's like, sure.
Oh, wow.
So we go backstage, have some fun, like, you know, we're bonding, whatnot. And then I'm about to go on stage, about to introduce me. And my wife was there for this too, because, you know, I was in New York. And so we looked up, and I was like, hey, do you think the crowd's gonna like recognize me? I was like, I don't know. It's like freaking, like who, like teenagers at a rap concert? Do you think they're like keeping up with politics? I'm like, I don't know. I guess we'll find out. So I go out there, and then like they freaking go crazy.
Oh, yeah.
You know, yeah. They start chanting Andrew Yang. I think even Rich Brian was like, what the hell? So yeah, so we're trying to reach different types of Americans, including the Asian American community, and our numbers show that it's working. Numbers are showing that a really significant proportion of the people that support this campaign are politically disengaged people. It's their first time actually caring about politics, and very, very high proportions of these independents. So it's one reason why having someone like Rivers Cuomo go to Iowa is like a nice win for us, because, you know, we bring in people that might not naturally be into politics. The first state to vote is Iowa. The second state to vote is New Hampshire. Third state is Nevada. The fourth is South Carolina. So to give you a map of this, Iowa's going to be a tougher environment for us, in part because every other campaign is freaking like just flooding the market with TV ads. And like a lot of the other campaigns are essentially saying, like, it doesn't go well in Iowa, it's not going to work. This is one thing that came out of like the Kamala Harris campaign. You probably saw this, where she said like she's moving to Iowa because they decided that Iowa. I left a word out of that statement. She's moving to Iowa anyway. If you're into politics, you know what I'm talking about. So that is not the situation we're in. We're going to compete in Iowa, but we think that we can